1400 years ago, a man born here in Mecca in Saudi Arabia changed the course of world history.
If you had to rate the top people in the history of the world as leaders, the name of Muhammad would be in the top 3.
Here we have a man who began a mission. He gave light to the world.
For 1.5 billion Muslims, he is the last and greatest of that long line of prophets who have brought the word of God to humanity.
He was not just a spiritual genius, but he also had political gifts of a very high order.
He laid the foundations for a religion, Islam, that after his death developed a culture and civilization that spread around the world and inspired some of the most beautiful architecture. Almost nothing is known about Muhammad, whereas for Muslims he is the ultimate role model and his life is known in every detail. So who was he? What was his message? Why are so many people, Muslims and non-Muslims, divided over his legacy? In this groundbreaking series, I will explore the many complexities of his life story, about the revelations he is said to have received from God, about his many wives, about his relations with the Jews of Arabia, about his use of war and peace, and about the laws that he enacted when he set up his own state. I want to uncover the real Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam. Peace be upon him. Muhammad was born in Mecca in the year 570 into the ruling tribe of the city, the Quraysh. At the age of 40, according to Muslim tradition, he received a blinding revelation from God, the first of many that would go on to change not just his life, but the history of the world. This is the defining moment in Muhammad's life, and today for the 1.5 billion people all around the world who follow him, completely accepting his revelation defines what it means to be a Muslim. Muhammad's revelations would become the sacred text of Islam, the Quran, literally the recitation. The orthodox Muslim position is that it is God himself who is the author of the Quran, and Muhammad was just the person to whom it was first revealed. When he started preaching, Muhammad had quickly attracted a small band of followers, but they were now under threat of death from the rulers of Mecca who controlled the Kaaba, a shrine that housed the many gods of Arabia. They feared that Muhammad's message, that there was only one true God, would destroy the importance of the Kaaba and in turn lead to Mecca's economic and political ruin. By 620, Muhammad had also lost 2 of his greatest supporters, his loyal wife of 25 years, Khadija, and his clan protector, his uncle Abu Talib. He had reached one of the lowest points of his life. But it was at this moment that he had another extraordinary spiritual experience that would transform his life. According to Muslim tradition, one night after falling asleep at the Kaaba in Mecca, Muhammad was transported on a metaphysical journey to a place hundreds of miles north, a city that is also holy to Christians and Jews, Jerusalem. What would become known as Muhammad's night journey would establish Jerusalem in Muslim eyes as a sacred city, a place of devotion and pilgrimage, second only to Mecca and Medina.
Jerusalem is very important to Muslims because it represents a part of our creed and faith. The first event was the night journey and ascension to heaven, when God sent Muhammad to his night journey from Mecca to Jerusalem and ascended him from Jerusalem to the heavens.
According to Muslim tradition, Muhammad is awoken during the night by the angel Gabriel, who lifts him up onto a winged horse called Al-Buraq, and he is then miraculously transported across the desert to Jerusalem. And it's from this point that Muhammad begins one of the most powerful and extraordinary experiences of his life. He's taken on a journey where he meets all the past prophets, from Abraham to Moses and even Jesus, and he prays with all of the prophets. He is then offered water, wine, or milk to drink, and he chooses milk in order to signify the middle path he's trying to steer through life. And then a celestial ladder appears, and Muhammad begins a mystical ascent through the 7 heavens, where he is eventually taken to the heavenly throne itself and is spoken to by God himself. To modern rational ears, it's an incredible story. But for Muslims, it is one of the most important events in Muhammad's life. Whether it can be seen as a literal physical journey or a spiritual experience has divided believers and non-believers alike.
هذه معجزة. والمعجزة هي جزء
This was a miracle, and the miracle is part of the faith. It does not have any scientific explanation, and it is against what is normal. We believe it because it is said in the Quran and in the honorable quotes of the Prophet.
ووردت في الأحاديث النبوية الشريفة.
I really think deeply that it was a spiritual journey, and the meaning of it is, in fact, that he went to Jerusalem and then he went very close to the one God, the Creator.
This is actually the shrine inside the rock, which is covered by the famous gold dome mosque known as the Dome of the Rock. And it's exactly from this point where the Prophet Muhammad is said to have gone on his night journey. Now, for some people, it was and is a literal physical journey in which the Prophet Muhammad traveled in the blink of an eye from Mecca, 800 miles away, all the way here to Jerusalem. But for other people, the night journey is actually symbolic. It's a spiritual journey in which the Prophet's soul enters a new realm of divine revelation.
It was highly important symbolically, because in this night journey, the Prophet Muhammad leads Moses, Abraham, Noah, Jesus, Jacob, all the prophets. He leads them in prayer, and God speaks with Muhammad. And in this discourse, God orders upon the Prophet and upon all the Muslims the single most important action that a Muslim has to perform, the 5 daily prayers.
Muhammad's night journey to Jerusalem and his ascension to heaven when he meets all the past prophets dating back to Abraham, so familiar to Jews and Christians, is a crucial moment in his life. For Muslims, it is a confirmation and acceptance by these other prophets and even God himself that Muhammad is the last in the long line of men who have brought the word of God to humanity, and that Islam and its followers were also a part of the ancient Abrahamic tradition. It was also an indication that Muhammad was now prepared to leave his tribal past behind him and bring his message to the wider world.
The Prophet's night journey goes away from tribalism. It finishes not with the tribe, but with an embrace of humanity and an abandonment of the tribal spirit and a reaching out to others. That's the theological meaning of what's happening.
Because of what happened just behind me, Jerusalem is considered by Muslims to be the 3rd holiest shrine in Islam after Mecca and Medina. And because this city continues to be under Israeli control, that's why Jerusalem continues to be such a potent symbol for Muslims around the world. Muhammad's night journey was a seminal moment. It marked the ending of one period of his life and the beginning of another. He was about to begin a new and even more dangerously radical phase of his mission, in which he would abandon his tribal life completely. Rather than trying to defeat the Quraysh in Mecca, he would leave the city and start again somewhere else. One day, In a place here which used to be a small oasis, Muhammad met a group of men from the town of Yathrib, which is about 15 days camel ride to the north. The men told Muhammad about the warfare and the constant feuding that affected their community. Muhammad listened to them, and for his part, he told them about his mission, about the unity of God, about the importance of living a virtuous life, and of the rewards of heaven. Now, importantly, the men sat and were even excited by what Muhammad had to say. And this was important because it was completely different to the reaction that Muhammad was used to getting in Mecca. The meeting ended with the 6 men from Yathrib converting to Islam and agreeing to meet Muhammad once again. Conditions had now got so bad in Mecca for Muhammad, he felt that he had no choice but to get his followers to do the unthinkable, to abandon the city of their birth for Yathrib and an uncertain future in a place where they would live without any clan protection.
The community in Yathrib was made up of a number of different tribes. Some of them were pagan, the Aus and Khazraj. Some of them were Jewish. There are 3 main Jewish tribes. And there was a lot of disagreement, in fact, in Yathrib between different communities about how they wanted to do things. There was sort of a lot of jostling for power and prestige, and they felt that they needed a mediator. And they had heard about Muhammad, who at that time was a preacher in Mecca, growing reputation in that part of the peninsula. And they perceived in him someone who could perhaps mediate in their disputes and be a sort of neutral arbiter and come and help them resolve the problems within Yathrib.
It wasn't until the following year that an even bigger delegation came all the way from Yathrib seeking out another meeting with the Prophet Muhammad. And this time they held it under cover of darkness and in secret. And it led to a unity between the two, between the Prophet Muhammad and the community in Yathrib. I am of you and you are of me, Muhammad said. Now, this agreement, it's important to bear in mind, was something really new, something that was a radical departure, because it wasn't based on clan alliances, on family, or on tribal allegiances. It was based on something far more universal that went way beyond kinship.
It is an act of extraordinary daring, audacity, and genius, in a sense. In Arabia at this time, it was absolutely unheard of to leave your tribe, your blood group, permanently and take up permanent residence with another. It was blasphemy. The sacred tribe was the absolute value in Arabia. And for him to leave it like that and create a new kind of community, an ummah, a community based on ideology rather than relationship, was unheard of.
If the rulers of Mecca got wind of Muhammad's plans, the consequences could be disastrous. So Muhammad now had to get his followers out of the city without alerting the Quraysh. Over the next few months, a few of Muhammad's companions left the city each night, so as not to arouse any suspicions, until finally only a handful were left, including his faithful companion Abu Bakr, his young cousin Ali, and Muhammad himself. Meanwhile, the Quraysh themselves had been planning, this time to assassinate Muhammad himself. The idea was that one member of each of Mecca's clans would stab Muhammad at the same time, making it impossible for Muhammad's own clan to revenge his death, as too many people would have been involved. One night, the group surrounded his house, and believing they saw someone sleeping in Muhammad's bedroom, the assassins, with their daggers drawn, rushed into his bedroom. But instead, they found his young cousin Ali asleep in his place. Muhammad had fled.
He's a very canny man. They're going to kill him in this assassination plot that he escapes from, goes on this wonderful journey with Abu Bakr. The thing I like of many, many aspects of it is that he made certain that everybody paid their debts. They were leaving Mecca, but every debt had to be fulfilled. There's an underlying Arabic code of honor feeding the division.
Along with Abu Bakr, Muhammad had slipped out of Mecca unnoticed. He was now en route to to his new home in Yathrib. Even though Muhammad had fled, the Meccans were really determined to pursue him, and within hours they were hot on his trail, and they chased him all the way through the punishing steep climb on the foothills of Mount Thawr. But by the time they reached the top, there was no Muhammad and there was none of his footprints. Eventually the Meccans just had to give up and go all the way back down to Mecca. But all this while, unknown to them, Muhammad and his companion Abu Bakr had been hiding in a cave at the top of Mount Thawr. And when the coast was clear, they just simply continued on their journey towards Yathrib. It was now 622 AD, and Muhammad was in his early 50s. He had grown up in Mecca as an orphan. He had experienced some of the wider world with his uncle on many caravan trading trips. He had been married and had a family. He had received a series of divine revelations, but had been rejected by his own tribe. For over 10 years, he and his small band of about 200 followers had suffered extreme humiliation and persecution. Finally, with people plotting to assassinate him, he had fled his home to a place completely unknown to him. This event became known as the Hijra, literally a cutting off from the past. There was now no way back for Muhammad and his new movement.
He went as a preacher. He didn't go as a conqueror. They said, come here and be our judge. We're not going to accept you as prophet of God. We're just going to accept you as a prophet, a revered man whose word we trust. He didn't come with a conquering army. He came as a refugee, as an exile, as a dignified man of respect.
Muhammad was preaching Islam in Mecca for 13 years. He only had 150 followers, max. He is a very good calculator. He knew if he fought them from inside Mecca, he was going to lose. He left at the right time because he wanted to expand his message, and he went to the perfect location where he can actually hurt the Mecca people and conquer Mecca from outside, not from inside.
The Hijra, or migration from Mecca to Yathrib, is the turning point, if you like, in Muhammad's life.
The Hijra is so important in Muhammad's life and the history of Islam itself that the year in which it took place is the starting point for the traditional Islamic calendar. All Islamic religious festivals and events are still fixed using this calendar, dating back to the moment Muhammad left Mecca in 622 AD.
I think it's of great theological significance that this marks the beginning of the Muslim era. The Muslim era does not begin as the Christian era with the birth of the Prophet, but with the date of the Hijra. This break with the tribal spirit is being undertaken.
When Muhammad and his followers first came here, what they found was nothing like the city of Mecca that they had left. Yathrib, as it was then known, was basically a large oasis, a series of villages, each village dominated by a different tribe. It was a situation that inevitably led to intense rivalries and conflict. Yathrib would later have its name changed in honor of Muhammad. It became known as Madinat al-Nabi, the city of the Prophet, or Medina for short.
They arrived with nothing, and they immediately had to integrate themselves from being a great trading Meccan aristocracy to being poor, penniless, wearing the rags of their clothing in a very, very wealthy oasis, full of its own wealth hierarchies. They ground corn, they wove mats, and they fitted in.
When Muhammad came to Medina, what kind of a place was Medina?
Okay, Medina at that time, it wasn't a complete city. It was what you call sub-communities.
Collection of different tribes and communities. Yeah.
The center of Medina, which were the Prophet and the main of Al-Ansar, or the people of
followers.
Medina.
Yeah.
And then you have people in Quba, you have people in Al-Qiblatain, and then you have the Jew, the east of Medina, and also in the south of Medina. So you have tribes surrounding Medina, but as a general, they call it Medina.
Muhammad's newfound freedom allowed him to build his own mosque. It became almost an extension of his own home.
Tell me about when the Prophet Muhammad built his first mosque here in Medina.
He found the land in the center of Medina and he built this mosque.
But this mosque, the model that you have here, is very different from the one that is in Medina now, which is one of the biggest and grandest mosques in the world. This is very simple.
Yeah, because at that time, try to imagine, you are talking about 14 centuries before. The building was very simple, about 35 meter by 35 meter. But it was similar to the building around Medina, which was built by mud and also stones in foundation and palm trees so they can cover part of the mosque, and they make an open area in the back of the mosque.
Now, that same mosque has been transformed into this, one of the biggest in the world, able to hold up to 500,000 worshippers at any one time. Muhammad used his mosque like a community center. He not only preached here, but also made it his office, where he could settle disputes, hold negotiations, and have public debates. Everyone was free to enter and speak with him. Jews, Christians, non-believers, even slaves. Above all, he and his followers could now come to the mosque and worship in relative peace. But they faced one practical problem. There was no effective means to tell people when it was time to pray. According to tradition, one day the Prophet Muhammad gathered everyone here in the courtyard of his mosque, where they wanted to discuss how the faithful should be called to prayer. Should it be like the Christians at the time using bells, or the Jews who used the horn, or should it be something else like using fire beacons? Eventually, after much discussion, it was decided that the new religion of Islam should be proclaimed with the human voice itself. The man Muhammad picked as the first person to announce the call for prayers was a very symbolic choice. Bilal, a freed African slave who had endured the most brutal persecution in Mecca. In Muhammad's time, slavery existed all over Arabia, and although he never abolished it, Muhammad and his companions did free slaves like Bilal. Every day, Bilal would climb to the rooftop of the mosque, and in a loud voice, he would call the faithful to prayer. This call to prayer has since become an integral part of Muslim life. Although the words used are the same the world over, each call has a distinctive sound, characteristic to its place. The mosque and its later distinctive tower or minaret would become one of the most identifiable Islamic symbols.
A mosque is not just a place of worship. A mosque is a focal point of community. It is a place where the transformative mission of Islam must be put into practice by services for the needy, services for the community, services to help people to achieve the objectives of Islam. It's a centre for education. That's what a mosque should be. It's not what an awful lot of mosques are today. And the other thing is that mosques have to be welcoming, open places, not just for Muslims, because the transformative mission, the social objectives of Islam don't belong just to Muslims, they are for everybody.
But Muhammad was now not only the prophet of a new religion, he was also effectively the political leader of the community here in Medina. And he fused these two roles right here in the courtyard of his mosque where he spent most of his days. Now, as his role grew, Muhammad decided that what he really needed was an agreement that would not only formalize his role in Medina, but also his relationship with the various tribes. It became known as the Constitution of Medina and is thought to be one of the earliest written constitutions anywhere in the world.
This constitution, all the tribes of Medina, they sign it together.
Including the Jews, including the pagans?
Include everyone. They sign it to call what they call it Ummah. The
community?
Yeah, everyone is responsible for the protection of Medina and they are equal against the law. They run a complete state with all its law. For example, if any two Jews fight each other, they will come to the Prophet and he will judge them not according to Islamic law, to the Jews' law. There is a complete court, everything is there as a state. So he built what you call it a complete civilized state in Arabia.
Although it survived throughout his lifetime, after his death, Muhammad's Constitution of Medina was first changed and later completely discarded by later Muslim leaders.
This is one of the worst problems that we have today. To me, the most important part of the example of the Prophet and the message of the Quran is the acceptance of plurality. The need for and the realization that there are many faiths, many ways, and all are capable of being a community, an ummah together. I think Muslims marginalize this message. I think they fail to hold it as the central principle of social existence. And by doing that, they actually defy the example of the Prophet.
Muhammad and his followers had arrived in Medina penniless. And although they were now free of the daily persecution they had faced in Mecca, their enemies still sought to destroy them. In tribal Arabia, vengeance was a very powerful motive. The Muslims in Medina now faced a threat to their very existence. The much more powerful Meccans who had driven Muhammad out persecuted his followers by taking their property and their very means of survival, were still plotting to destroy them. Muhammad had to find a way over their enmity and fast. Then, according to Muslim tradition, Muhammad received a series of revelations urging him and his followers to fight back against those who had expelled them from their homes.
The permission is only this. In the Quran, you are under oppression, the people are attacking you, you have the right to resist. So this is why from the mainstream classical legal Islamic tradition, it's the defensive, what we call the defensive jihad, which is you are oppressed, you can resist this oppression in the name of your rights. So all the people and some of the Muslim groups who are using this verse to say we can kill and this is a carte blanche for war are wrong. This is not what is said in the verse. The verse is they are attacking you. You have the right to resist because at the end of the day it's a question of survival.
For Muhammad and his followers, the victory at Badr had a deep religious meaning. It was a vindication of the faith that has sustained him and his followers for now nearly 14 years. They saw it as God's approval for their new movement. Ever since, Muslims have seen this early victory as a divine deliverance, comparable to the Israelites' deliverance from Egypt at the Red Sea. One day, while he was praying, following this victory, Muhammad received another revelation that would give him and his followers a more distinct identity. The revelation instructed him to change the direction in which Muslims pray, known as the Qibla. Now, originally Muhammad and his followers, just like the Jews and the Christians at that time, prayed towards Jerusalem. So that Qibla in this mosque here faces north towards Jerusalem. But then, according to tradition, Muhammad turned the whole congregation around and made them pray in that direction, towards the Qibla facing Mecca. And for that reason, this mosque is known as the Mosque of the Two Qiblas. Now, this seemingly simple change was actually really quite profound because it marked, first of all, the emergence of a new and proud identity, that of the Muslims, which was different in how they prayed towards the Jews and the Christians. And it also means to this day that Muslims, wherever they are in the world, 5 times a day, all pray in the same direction, towards Mecca. The more powerful and successful Muhammad became, the more his relations with the Jewish tribes worsened. He expected their support in his conflict with Mecca, but they had lucrative commercial ties with the Quraysh in Mecca, which they were not about to give up. And so, according to Muslim tradition, the Jewish tribes began to have secret meetings with Muhammad's enemies. Some of the pagan tribes that had converted to Islam also started to resent Muhammad's success, and they too began to turn against him. Muhammad now faced a dual threat from both inside and outside his own ranks. It wasn't long after the Battle of Badr that Muhammad began to encounter his first serious problems with the Jewish tribes from Medina. He learned of a series of secret meetings between the Jewish tribes and his Quraysh enemies from Mecca. Muhammad's fear was that if the Quraysh attacked, the Jewish tribes may well swap sides wholesale and help to crush him, and thus he felt he had to act. He surrounded one of the villages of the Jewish tribe south of Medina, and after a 2-week siege, they surrendered and then they were banished en masse from Medina.
Part of the Constitution of Medina had been a compact in which people of different tribes and faiths could live together, that Jews had a right to live and function within the society commercially, to practice their faith, but that what they owed the state was their loyalty. And what happens at a certain point is that the Jews, not all of the Jews, but particular groups of Jews, are seen as, in effect, committing treason, as aligning themselves and making vulnerable the Medinan community, aligning themselves with the enemy.
At that time, the acceptable punishment for treason was death. So the fact that Muhammad only banished this Jewish tribe from Medina might suggest he was still hoping for some kind of reconciliation with the others. But relations between the two sides remained fraught. Another event was to increase the tension even more. Almost exactly a year after the Battle of Badr, the Quraysh returned to Medina looking for vengeance with a new army 3 times larger than Muhammad's. Once again, Muhammad decided to meet the Meccan forces outside of the oasis here at Mount Uhud. But his forces were greatly depleted. For one thing, the Jewish tribes decided not to fight because it was the Sabbath. And one of Muhammad's commanders deserted him, taking 300 soldiers with him. The Meccans, on the other hand, were motivated by the desire for vengeance. This time, neither side was able to deliver a crushing.
It was a hard-fought battle. It was a draw, if you like. But the important thing was that the Muslim community of Muhammad in Medina survived.
The crucial difference was that this time the Meccans had some inside help. According to Muslim tradition, some of the Jewish tribes in Medina were now actively helping Muhammad's enemies. The third and final battle took place in 627 AD, 5 years after Muhammad had moved to Medina, when the Quraysh returned with a massive army of 10,000 warriors. Muhammad could only muster a force of 3,000, and so this time there was no question of him facing the Quraysh in open battle. So he decided to fortify Medina against a siege. Medina was relatively easy to defend because it's surrounded by volcanic hills, but its most vulnerable point was to the north. And so Muhammad adopted a very simple tactic. He dug a huge trench, and its effects on the Quraysh advance was dramatic. This area of present-day modern Medina is where the so-called Battle of the Trench took place. Over there was the Meccan army, and over there was the Muslim army, and the trench dividing the two forces. The Meccan army was said to be so large that it covered an area as far as the eye could see, but thus began what must have been an incredibly strange standoff. The Meccan army was absolutely unable to do anything. They didn't have any siege equipment in which to get over this trench that Muhammad and his forces had built. For his part, Muhammad was quite prepared to sit and wait and allow the Meccans to get frustrated and leave.
Digging a trench meant that the horses of the Meccans couldn't enter the city. And it's been taken by Muslims through the centuries as a sign of Muhammad's astuteness in ordering and commanding this different sort of defense, which caught the Meccans off guard. It meant that the strategies or the tactics that they were pursuing didn't work.
According to Muslim tradition, after 2 weeks, the Meccan supplies were starting to run out. So they asked their new secret ally, one of the Jewish tribes, the Banu Qurayza, to attack the Muslim forces from within the city. Whereas before Jewish tribes had only traded with Muhammad's enemies or refused to take up arms in support of Muhammad, this time they were now on the verge of actually attacking him. Muslim scholars claim that at the very least, the Banu Qurayza betrayed Muhammad by negotiating with the Quraysh and being on the brink of attacking the Muslim forces, even though the Quraysh and their allies withdrew before this attack could take place. Muhammad ordered his army to surround the village of the Jewish tribe. They held out for 25 days before surrendering. He now faced a dilemma. If he allowed them to go free, they could join the Quraysh in Mecca and help them to crush him. Rather than make the decision himself, Muhammad agreed that an independent arbiter be appointed. He allowed the Jewish tribal leaders to choose a respected local leader to arbitrate and pronounce judgment.
It was the third time he was meeting some of the people and say, I'm going now to ask someone to judge you. Are you happy with this? And he asked Sa'd ibn Mu'adh to come and to decide. He decided that the man should be killed. And before this, the Prophet said, I'm not going to judge, I'm going to ask someone. The point is for us here is to acknowledge two things. First, it happened that men were killed, but in a situation where he spared the life of the people 2 times before, and this was the last time, and say, this is enough, because you are continuing, even though we are sparing your life, to attack us in a way which was betraying us.
It had nothing to do with the fact that they were Jews. They could have been a Christian tribe or any other tribe. It wasn't a Holocaust. It wasn't directed at the Jews because of their religion. If that was the case, then it would have set a precedent in Muslim history, and we would not have found the golden age of Jewish enlightenment taking place under the Muslims in Spain. If this claim was true, then we would have found the position of Jews throughout Islamic history would have been very, very different.
Some of the historical events with taking a position against the Jews only because they are Jews are not respecting the Islamic tradition. This is unacceptable, this is racism, this is anti-Semitism, this is against our religion. We can't at the same time say, hum min ahl al-kitab, that they are people of the book and they are following the monotheistic tradition, and at the same time have racist statements just targeting the Jews, while the Prophet, when he arrived in Medina, and this is something which is very important for us, when he started this Islamic society with the rules, he spoke about al-Ummah al-Islamiyya, the community, and he said, hum min ummatina, they are members of our ummah. Who? The Jews and the Christians. So how come he's saying this, and now we come with these statements that are completely unacceptable from an Islamic viewpoint, and we are confusing what a state, a government can do, for example in the Middle East, with what the Jews are. The Jews are our brothers and sisters in faith and humanity.
The legacy of Muhammad's treatment of the Jewish tribes in Medina is still with us today, but at the time it saw him emerge as the leader of a powerful new movement in Arabia that was gaining in confidence. But would this be his only legacy? He was now in his late 50s and for most of his life had had to face brutal persecution. He'd been forced out of his hometown and was engaged in almost continual bloody conflict. In particular, Muhammad had to resolve this struggle for supremacy with the Meccans. Would that end in yet more violence, or could he find a safer future for his followers? In essence, would Muhammad be remembered as a leader and warrior who conquered Arabia, or as a prophet with a wider message for the entire world? In the next and final part, Muhammad faces his enemies one more time and wins, but through peace. And he outlines his legacy in a final sermon in Mecca.
The Prophet's final sermon sets the agenda for modern contemporary Muslim society. It shows where we've failed, and it shows where we have to try to get to. It sums up the transformative mission that was the life of the Prophet.